I know that Bitcoin ripped from 70 to 100K,
Yeah.
but I think the change is much greater than that. Opportunity is fundamentals minus perception. And the opportunity has never been greater in crypto if you use that math. I think the challenge the market is facing right now is all the short-term news is negative and the long-term news is incredibly positive.
That's so true.
Everyone's watching the headlines, but are they missing the real story? Bitwise CIO Matt Hougan says the market is wildly underestimating what's happening behind the scenes, especially in Washington. From regulatory rollbacks to a flood of institutional capital, Hougan believes we're on the edge of something much bigger than a simple price move from $70,000 to $100,000. In this exclusive interview, we unpack why Bitcoin's true breakout may still be ahead, why the ETF boom is only just beginning, and how a once hostile US regulatory environment has flipped into a massive long-term tailwind for crypto. If you care about Bitcoin adoption, institutional capital flows, and macro investing trends, this is a must-watch. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss conversations that move the market. Let's get into it.
When you look at the research that's out and you meet with all the folks you're meeting with, what's something that's really surprised you in maybe the last couple months?
Oh, what's something that surprised me? It has surprised me. Look, I think the market is underpricing the change in Washington. That's actually surprised me. I know that Bitcoin ripped from 70 to 100K, but I think the change is much greater than that. I look at what's happening, not just in Bitcoin, but in DeFi, even in alt layer ones. And I think the market is just underestimating the change. The reason for that is I think unless you worked in crypto over the last 4 years, you can't imagine how challenging it was, right? You can't understand how difficult being debanked regularly was in this ecosystem. You can't understand how difficult multiple subpoenas and lawsuits were. You sound crazy when you say that banks won't take your $10 million deposit. People are like, no way.
Did that happen to Bitwise?
It did happen to Bitwise. It happened to everyone in crypto, of course. We all faced banking challenges. When Bitwise was first formed, it was difficult to get people to accept our checks from VCs to start the business, which is an incredible fact. But unless you realize just how repressive it was, you can't imagine what it will be like now that that's lifted. You look at what's happened at the SEC recently, pulling back on the Coinbase lawsuit, pulling back on the Uniswap lawsuit. I think just the rebound for that is 2 to 3x more than we've seen in the market so far. So I guess I've been surprised that people haven't sort of felt and intuited that difference. But now I recognize it's because they didn't know how bad we had it. And so therefore, how open the market is now.
Yeah, so it's a good buying opportunity.
I think it's a great long-term buying opportunity. I saw a tweet yesterday from a Vichel from Electric Capital that said, opportunity is fundamentals minus perception. And the opportunity has never been greater in crypto if you use that math.
What do you think people should be paying attention to as the next catalyst for getting Bitcoin to maybe that next price level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's going to be, there's a slow, steady drip. So unfortunately, that's not a one-off catalyst. But every time the Bitcoin 13F filings come out and they show that the scale of institutional adoption has gone from 14 to 18 to 29, it's going to 50 or 60. That's going to be another signpost that we're moving there. Every time you see another company say it's putting Bitcoin on its balance sheet, that's going to be another sort of pebble in the pond that lifts the tide. So there's going to be a lot of this sort of slow turn. I think if maybe there's, if we do see more sovereigns come out, I think maybe that could be the spark or catalyst. But I think it's more of a slow bull market. Actually, I wrote about this week in my CIO memo. I think the challenge the market is facing right now is all the short-term news is negative and the long-term news is incredibly positive.
That's so true.
And so it's so easy to focus on the short term. So I don't know if it's one catalyst. It's just like the tide slowly coming in on Bitcoin, which I think is what's happening.
How do you think about Bitcoin fitting into sort of this macro landscape that does feel uncertain for a lot of people, right? Inflation is still structurally higher than they want it to be. There have been some tremors in the bond market, nothing crazy. We see pullbacks, we see a lot of volatility. Some people think there's going to be some massive deflationary bust. Others think that liquidity is only going to go higher because they have to keep spending. How should people look at everything that's going on that feels like there's so much risk in general and then position Bitcoin in that.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the market and say it's more volatile or open or uncertain than it has been in the past for exactly the reasons you called out. Macro prognosticators are all over the map on
And
what they expect.
geopolitics, yeah.
Yeah, runaway inflation, runaway deflation. Where are you?
Mhm.
I think where Bitcoin fits is you need a hedge. You need a thing that opts out of that system and that is steady, producing blocks all the time. Maybe it's not 100% of your portfolio, but if it's zero, then you're 100% exposed to this mess. And maybe people should think about having a little bit that's not exposed to that mess.
So Michael Saylor says, never sell your Bitcoin. I think Trump even came out and said that, never sell your Bitcoin. But look, we have money because we want stuff, right? we want what the money can buy us. We want the nice house and the vacation. So do you see a future where people are going to be borrowing against their Bitcoin or their holdings in the derivatives? I mean, what do you see the future look like so that people don't have to sell their Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say from our client perspective, we see a lot of people coming to Bitwise and trying to generate income on their Bitcoin. Large Bitcoin holders who, whether they want to stake in the emerging staking ecosystem or they want lending or they want to write derivatives contracts against that, they're asking us, how do I generate 3, 4, 5, 10% yield while still having exposure to Bitcoin? And so we work with them on those solutions. But I think it's what you're pointing to. I don't think people are going to want to part with their Bitcoin.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Also, I would note the people who have bought Bitcoin to this point have strong conviction. I don't think, they get played as weak. I don't think they're weak hands because you had to step out of the mainstream to do so. And you only step out of the mainstream if you're confident. And so I think we're going to have a lot of people who want to hold on to this. So you'll see a rise in lending markets. You'll see a rise in carry trade. You'll see a rise in staking on Bitcoin. I think all of that's going to happen.
Were you expecting the ETFs to be as successful as they were?
No. I was expecting the ETFs to be successful, but they were so much more. It's so crazy. Before the Bitcoin ETFs launched, the most successful ETF of all time gathered $5 billion in its first year. That was the ceiling. ETFs did 37, right? 37 is so much more. I was optimistic they might do 10, right? I thought it was going to be huge. We had worked on it for like 6 years. So of course we thought it would be huge, but $37 billion is crazy. All that said, I bet we do 50 this year. I think people, if they think it's like this bell curve and down we go, it's not. Every ETF almost in history that's been a success does more in year 2 than year 1, and more in year 3 than year 2, and more in year 4 than year 3. For the reasons we started talking about at the beginning, half of the market can't even buy this thing yet, right? And the other half is just learning. And the people who bought it in the first year are probably going to double down. Think about the first time you bought Bitcoin. Do you own more today than you owned then? Or is your holdings, of course you own more. Like that's just the direction of travel. So I was blown away, but I think this year will be even bigger.
That's so bullish. That's great to hear. Let's talk a little bit about your backstory. You said you ran ETF.com before Bitwise. Just talk to me about your journey a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I spent about 12 years running a company called ETF.com. It was a data, media, and events business in ETFs. Here's the crazy thing about ETFs. Today, they're like the apple pie of investing. Everyone loves them. Low cost, John Bogle, diversified. They're plain vanilla.
The first thing I learned about was SPY.
SPY.
I was learning about investing in equities.
Exactly. The amazing origin story of ETFs is that wasn't the case. In the early days, people hated them. People called them EFTs. The Financial Times called them weapons of mass destruction.
No way.
Yep, you can find it. There were congressional hearings about whether ETFs were destroying the American dream.
Why?
Because they were challenging entrenched incumbents.
Interesting.
And people were worried about index investing, and they were worried about liquidity mismatches, and people hated them. And the largest financial firms refused to participate. Right, they were slow to adopt. It was
just
all
like we're seeing with Vanguard and Bitcoin.
It's exact. Vanguard hated ETFs as well, and now they're one of the largest providers in the space. I raised that because the reason I looked towards crypto in part after I sold that business was I saw the same thing playing out. You had this incredible technology that lower costs, that's more fair, that's better for people, and you had an industry that said this thing is terrible, ridiculous, congressional hearings, et cetera. And just like ETFs went from a few hundred million to today 15 trillion, I think crypto is going from, a few hundred billion when I joined to probably 15, 30 trillion as well. So it's the same story.
Fascinating.
Hmm.
Well, it's been so great to talk to you. I hope you come back on the show. Any final thoughts or anything we didn't cover that you really want to share with the audience?
I just think it's an incredible long-term opportunity. I know there's a lot of short-term news and short-term volatility, but if you look at the long-term trends of institutional adoption, corporate adoption, better regulation, the government not stepping in to ban this thing, I think it's an incredible long-term chance.